Universal and Disney have had a great rivalry throughout the years, and among all this competing, they have lots of things in common like amazing franchises, incredible theme parks, and fantastic lands. And one of the things they have most in common is that they sometimes retire and replace classic rides. Be part of the Duck Squad by subscribing and turning on all the notifications, and follow us on TikTok for more theme park content. We'll leave a link in the description. Kongfrontation.
Now you can go beyond the realm of any movie into the future of live entertainment, where every adventure you've seen on the screen happens to you. This is no ordinary theme park. It's a real working motion picture and television studio, and you're the star. Come to the only place on Earth where everything that happens in the movies happens to you. The only place where you can join Doc Brown on a rocket ride into a new dimension of thrills and excitement as you go back to the future. Live the movies at Universal Studios, Florida. No one makes believe like we do.
Universal and Disney have been in constant competition throughout the years, and their main battleground has been Orlando, Florida. This all started when Disney announced its plans to open a second Disney theme park.
Walt Disney, who will bring a new world of entertainment, pleasure, and economic development to the state of Florida. Walt Disney.
This park would be located in Orlando and would open in 1971. As soon as Disney announced this, Universal had the idea of opening another theme park, also in Orlando, that would be based around a studio tour, just like Universal Studios Hollywood was. The park would have a front lot that would have a walking tour and a back lot that would have a tram tour, very similar to the one located in Universal Studios Hollywood. Disney World opened and it became an instant success. So in 1981, Universal purchased 423 acres of land in Orlando so they could build their newest theme park. While Universal was planning this park and looking for potential investors, Disney was working on Epcot. And one of the pavilions that was being planned for the Future World area of the park was the Great Movie Ride Pavilion. This pavilion would be entertainment-based and would have the now-retired Great Movie Ride. Michael Eisner decided that instead of having this pavilion, he wanted a new, full-size studio-themed park. In 1985, Eisner announced the plans for Disney's MGM Studios, and these plans were very similar to what Universal was planning for their theme park. MGM Studios would have a tram tour that would take guests past 4 working sound stages, an animation building, backlot sets, and post-production facilities. And with this announcement, Universal knew that they needed to step up their game because if they didn't, it would look like they had copied Disney's plans. To do this, they brought the legendary Steven Spielberg as a creative consultant for the park. The company decided to keep the working movie studio concept for the theme park, but the tram tour was dropped altogether to create something so much better. They would take these main pieces of the tour and turn them into amazing separate standalone attractions. And one of these attractions was Kongfrontation, and it would be the most impressive attraction in the whole park. Because Kongfrontation was going to be the starring attraction of the park, Universal wanted state-of-the-art technology and effects for this attraction, so they would take what they did with King Kong Encounter back in Universal Studios Hollywood and make it bigger and better by the time Universal Studios Florida opened in 1990. The attraction would live inside a 6 stories tall building modeled after New York's Penn Station. Inside, a tram based on the Roosevelt Island Tramway would hang from the ceiling, and it would take guests into their terrifying encounter with Kong. There would be 2 giant and terrifying animatronic Kongs, both scaled to an astounding 40 feet tall with 54-foot arm spans, and they were 2 of the most lifelike animatronics ever developed. This all looked great, and the ride was ready to open for the park's inauguration. Or was it? The opening of Universal Studios Florida is known as a complete mess. Even before the park opened on that day, there was a power outage that knocked out the software that was used for the special effects for one of the other headlined attractions, Earthquake, the big one. Then when the park opened, Jaws was having a lot of trouble also, but we'll talk about that later. And Kongfrontation? Well, the talkback software that managed the interaction between King Kong and the tram holding his victims was not operating correctly, and technicians were forced to trigger the enormous animatronic creature's movements manually to ensure that Kong didn't snap his hand off. Universal had to offer free tickets for guests because of all these troubles, close the rides, and work on them tirelessly, so they could be ready for guests to enjoy. And by September, the rides were ready. Kongfrontation was an amazing attraction. Its theming, effects, and animatronics were mind-blowing. As soon as guests entered Penn Station, they found themselves inside a New York subway station, the Roosevelt Island Station, and then some city blocks until they reached the station where they boarded a large aerial tram. In this tram, guests were informed by a guide that they were being evacuated off of Manhattan and over to Roosevelt Island because of Kong's attack. The tram's radio was tuned to the police's emergency frequency, so that guests could be informed of Kong's location in the city. The tram traveled along the streets of downtown New York City, where guests could see all of the destruction that Kong had left behind. A police chopper appeared and described the scene around the tram over the radio, alerting that Kong was approaching the tramway and that he was grabbing a power pole. Kong's silhouette could briefly be seen as a spotlight shone on a building ahead of the tram. As the tram passed the power pole, it tipped over, and its electrical transformer exploded, unleashing a shower of sparks and fire, which ignited the derailed elevated subway train. And then, the tram found Kong, hanging from the Queensboro Bridge. A police helicopter hovering nearby opened fire on Kong to protect the approaching tram. Kong retaliated, pounding the roof of the tram and sending the chopper crashing and exploding into the bridge. The tram was able to escape the attack and cross over the river to Roosevelt Island. But then a second helicopter appeared, shining a bright searchlight directly at the tram. This made the guide unable to see what was ahead of their path, so they urged the chopper to turn off the light, and in doing so, revealed that Kong had cut the tram off. He proceeded to grab, lift, and subsequently drop the tram while being shot at by the police. The tram was able to escape once more, and small television monitors lowered from the tram's ceiling, and guests watched themselves on the ride as part of a breaking news report as the tram safely made its way into the Roosevelt Island station. Although Kong was never actually defeated, the news report indicated that he was making his way away from New York City, thereby alleviating the threat. This attraction was amazing in every way, and it continued being amazing until 2002. You see, Universal wanted to make sure that guests knew that when they visited their park, they would be riding the biggest blockbusters and hits of today. That meant they would be changing their rides all the time to keep up with current movies and hits, and they had a massive hit they wanted to have in their parks. In 1999, The Mummy had come out, leaving Universal with $416 million in the box office, and then the sequel came out in 2001, besting the original with $433 million. So having this hit in the parks was a no-brainer. That sadly meant the end for Kongfrontation, which closed on September 8, 2002, and $40 million and 2 years later, Revenge of the Mummy opened in its place. But thankfully, this was not the end for Kong at Universal Parks. Years later, on July 13, 2016, Skull Island Reign of Kong opened at Islands of Adventure, and while this new ride is nothing compared to what Kongfrontation used to be, we can honestly say that the queue is pretty impressive and creepy. This ride also has a huge and impressive Kong animatronic, but we can't help but miss Kongfrontation. Backdraft.
Happy anniversary to you, you world-famous studio that takes people behind the scenes. Happy anniversary to you, you shark-infested banana breath. Beat me up, Scotty.
In 1991, Universal Studios Hollywood was going through a great moment since the park had been established as one of the must-visit destinations in Southern California. During this time, the park began to expand, bringing to life attractions like E.T. Adventure and the famous Stairway. Another one of these new attractions was built up on the success of the 1991 film Backdraft, directed by Ron Howard and starring Kurt Russell and William Baldwin. The Universal team began construction of this attraction on the lower lot, and it opened in June of 1992. The attraction put guests right in the middle of the movie's production. They entered the backstage where the pre-show showed Scott Glenn and Kurt Russell talking about how dangerous and interesting the process of creating all the stunts was, and how the team did such a great job showing what real firefighters face every day. After the pre-show, guests were taken to a kind of cellar where the main show would take place. The show started with a narration, when suddenly the whole place began to catch fire. The flames reached almost 2,000 degrees, and everything that was happening took place just a few meters away from guests. The attraction was super impressive, since guests could be made to feel the heat that they would feel if they were inside a real fire. After a few minutes, the flames died down, but not before giving a last big bang, giving guests one final scare. These flames were generated by gas flame, which is silent, so a special track had to be created with the sounds of the fire and the explosions, otherwise the attraction would have been totally silent. Backdraft was closed on April 11, 2010, to make way for a new Transformers attraction. It is very impressive that the attraction had such a lifespan at Universal, since the film was not a huge success. Actually, many guests found out about the movie because of the attraction, and not the other way around. What's even more impressive is that this attraction is still alive at Universal Studios Japan. Many people say that it was a bad choice closing this classic attraction, but its replacement has been established as one of Universal Studios Hollywood's favorite rides for guests all over. Terminator 2 3D, Battle Across Time.
The future is coming after you, ruthlessly, relentlessly, engulfing you, overwhelming you, until it ultimately terminates you. And only one thing can save you.
I said I'd be back.
Terminator 2, 3D Battle Across Time. An incredible new way to ride the...
Universal has the best larger-than-life special effects spectacles of all theme parks, and for years they had what was considered one of the most revolutionary and massive special effects attractions of all time. Terminator 2 3D Battle Across Time. Ever since Universal Studios Florida opened, Terminator was one of the franchises that Universal had in mind to create an attraction for the park. And how could it not be, if ever since its debut in 1984, Terminator was a huge success among audiences everywhere. Terminator 2 Judgment Day alone made almost $517 million in box office. So Jay Stein, chairman and CEO of Universal Theme Parks, saw the opportunity to create an attraction based on the franchise. He decided to ask Gary Goddard, best known for being one of the masterminds behind the amazing adventures of Spider-Man. Goddard had previously designed the Conan the Barbarian stunt show for Universal, so Stein asked him to develop a new and exciting show based on Terminator, so that it could replace the Conan show. Goddard immediately accepted, but he saw a problem. How could he create a stunt show based on such a huge franchise with its motorcycle persecutions and a 100-foot-tall metallic liquid robot? He began feeling uncertain and even considered saying no to the project, but he knew that if he said no, Universal would eventually find someone that said yes, and that would make it work, so he decided to be that person. The team began coming up with ideas for the show until they came up with the idea of creating a live show using 3D screens and live actors, something that had never been seen before. Now, all that was left was to create an amazing story and concept for the show, so that when they presented it to James Cameron, who was known for being very protective of his work, he would be on board with it. So they worked on this for over a year and finally presented it to Cameron, and he loved it. He loved it so much that he decided to become a part of the project, and even make it canon in the Terminator universe. The story was situated right after the events of Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Eddie Furlong, Linda Hamilton, and Robert Patrick reprised their roles.
We are back again with the Terminator.
Yes!
And it's estimated that the attraction cost between $36 million and $60 million, with the film itself accounting for $24 million. And finally, on April 27, 1996, Terminator 2 3D Battle Across Time officially opened. The attraction took guests directly into Cyberdyne's headquarters for the presentations of their newest technological advance. Inside the queue, we could see lots of screens that showed videos about the latest innovations and products of Cyberdyne systems. And just before entering the pre-show, safety visors were given out so that they could be used during the main show. Inside the auditorium, Cyberdyne's Director of Community Relations and Media Control, Kimberly Duncan, introduces a promotional video about Cyberdyne's numerous technological contributions. Among these contributions were a way for doctors to perform surgery from afar, precision technology lenses that eliminate human error, and a type of Netflix and Skype. Suddenly, the transmission is interrupted by Sarah and John Connor.
Are we in? Where's the money? Okay, listen to me, everybody. We don't have much time. Skynet is your enemy. It must be destroyed before it destroys...
Who proceed to warn guests about Skynet and the future war against the machines, and tell them that they had 5 minutes to get out of the building. But then they are cut off, and the Cyberdyne video comes back. During that time, Duncan can be seen talking on a phone, telling someone on the other line to find the Connors. Once the video ends, Duncan tells the audience to ignore the Connors' warnings and proceed forward. In 2015, this promotional video was changed because the future technologies that were shown were now in existence, so a new CGI and narration now accompanied the remastered original footage, alongside some newly shot scenes. This new video also helped to promote the then upcoming Terminator Genesis. After the pre-show, guests were taken into a huge auditorium, where they would see a demonstration of Cyberdyne's newest creation, the Cyberdyne Series 70 Autonomous Infantry Unit. As soon as they were seated, they were told to put on their safety visors so they could watch the demonstration. After this, John and Sarah arrived and interrupted the presentation. They disabled the security alarms and forced Duncan to shut off the T-70s. But then, they are confronted by a T-1000 Terminator, and Duncan is killed by it while attempting to stop him, mistaking him as a police officer. Suddenly, a T-800 comes out of the time portal, or the screen, in its famous Harley so he can rescue John. He takes John back through the portal and into the future war between humans and machines, while Sarah stays behind in the present with the T-1000. John and the Terminator make their way across the war-ravaged landscape as they head towards Skynet. Along the way, they are chased by the T-1000, who follow them through the time portal, a flying hunter-killer, 4 mini-hunter-killers, and a Terminator endoskeleton. John and T-800 make their way into the Skynet facility, where they fight against a T-1000. A giant liquid metal spider that is similar to a very large T-1000. The fight goes on until T-800 sends John to a nearby time machine that will take him back to the present, while he stays behind to blow up Skynet and the T-1000. The show ends with the ground-shaking destruction of Skynet, leaving Sarah and John alone in the present time once again. Sarah finishes the show by saying that she feels that she owes her life to the Terminator for saving John's life. The attraction was a huge success for a long time, and it even opened at Universal Studios Hollywood and Universal Studios Japan. But as is the case with any futuristic attraction, the future came, and it became outdated. The technological advancements that were shown during the pre-show were a reality, and were even better than what was being presented. Another problem was that the Terminator franchise was not what it used to be among new generations, and Universal Studios needed new rides and attractions that brought guests to the parks. So in 2012, Universal closed the attraction at Universal Studios Hollywood to make way for Despicable Me, Minion Mayhem. Then, on October 8, 2017, Universal Studios Florida followed, announcing that they were going to replace it with a new live-action experience based on a high-energy Universal franchise. For a long time, there was no new info about the attraction, but then, in October 2019, it was announced that the attraction that would be replacing Terminator was the Bourne Stuntacular, a live show full of pyrotechnic stunts and special effects that would use screens and vehicles. This attraction sounds pretty impressive and is set to debut in the spring of 2020. Terminator 2 3D is still available at Universal Studios Japan in the New York area.
Hasta la vista, baby.
There are still many more rides and attractions that were retired by Universal that we need to cover. Did someone say part 2? And if you want to visit Universal to check out Universal's amazing rides, you can start planning your next vacation. Our friends at PixieVacations.com will help you plan your perfect vacation to Universal Studios Hollywood, Universal Studios Orlando, or Universal's Islands of Adventure, specifically tailored to your vacation style and budget. And working with a Pixie is completely free. So talk with them to make the best out of your next theme park vacation.